Welcome to OC Habitat's Coffee and Conservation. We are not doing our coffee and conservation like we were before. We were doing it every month. We're trying to start doing less virtually and more in person. So today we're doing virtually because we wanted to make sure that we got this one in before our next one, which is in person. I am going to be introducing Tiffany Chow, Angela Velasquez, and Gabby Lopez. And they are going to be speaking about a variety of different topics, birds of prey, gyres, and poison oak and mugwort. And I think it's all interesting and it's all relevant to Orange County, the habitats within Orange County, and hopefully it's relevant to your lessons. I see I think there might be a fair amount of Huntington Beach High School students. So hopefully it is feeding into maybe your APES classes or your biology classes. So we're going to go ahead and take it away. Like I said, we are going to start with Tiffany. We're asking that you please mute yourself, and we would love you to participate. So when we ask you to unmute, or annotate or put something in the chat, please participate. We would love to hear from you. We're going to take it away, Tiffany, if you want to pull up your slideshow, and we'll get going. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Tiffany, and I'm an intern here at OC Habitats. I'm also a third-year ecology major at UCLA, and today I'm going to be talking about the birds of prey that can be found in Orange County. So first, I'm going to be going over what a bird of prey is, and then I'll be talking about 4 different species that you can find in Orange County. And I'll tell you a little bit about their background and how you can identify them. And then I'll be doing some little ID quizzes to test out what you guys have learned. I'll also be talking about some various conservation issues that raptors face and also some local organizations that help raptors. So what is a bird of prey? Birds of prey are also known as raptors, and they are birds that have good eyesight, sharp talons, hooked beaks, and they hunt other animals. Birds of prey are also usually monogamous, which means they mate for life. And about 30 species can be found in California, and about 20 can be found in Orange County. So there are 6 main raptor groups. The ones that we'll be talking about today are the hawks and vultures. Hawks are actually divided into 2 groups called accipiters and buteos, and there's a couple others, but those are the 2 we'll be talking about later. They're generally small to medium in size, and they kill prey by crushing it with their talons. Vultures usually have bald heads, and they have a keen sense of smell, which is unique among birds because they typically have a very bad sense of smell. This is the list of raptors that can be found in Orange County. The ones that are highlighted are the ones that I'll be going over in detail. You can see that some are state threatened and state endangered, like the Swainson's hawk and bald eagle. None of these birds are federally threatened or endangered. Fully protected species means that they have special protections because they're at one point threatened with extinction. So this is the first raptor that we'll be going over today. This is a red-tailed hawk. It is in the genus Buteo, which are soaring hawks with broad wings and short tails. They live in almost any open area, including desert, grassland, and even along the side of the road. They mostly eat mammals and small birds, and you can see in this photo that there's a red-tailed hawk carrying a king snake. A cool fact about them is that the classic raspy bird call that you hear in a lot of westerns is the red-tailed hawk call. And I'm actually going to play that right now so you can hear it. So hopefully some of you guys have heard that call before in a movie. Before learning to identify red-tailed hawks, I want to talk about color morphs. Color morphs are variations in color within a species. With red-tailed hawks, there's 3 general color morphs. We have the light morph, which is when they have a white chest and a dark belly band. The dark morph, where they're chocolate brown, and you can see in this photo, this is a dark morph. And then we also have the rufous morph, which is a hawk with a reddish chest and a dark belly. Right away, you can see here that this is a rufous morph red-tailed hawk because it has the rufous color and then a dark band across the belly. When you're looking to identify red-tailed hawk, you want to look for the dark mark on the wings, and this is called a patagial mark. If you see it, you can be pretty much 100% certain that this is a red-tailed hawk. You also want to look for the dark band across the belly. And they also have this funky looking bulge on the inner side of their wing. Red-tailed hawks are fairly large. They're about between the size of a crow and a goose. If you want to tell if it's an adult or juvenile red-tailed hawk, juveniles have darker barrings on their wings, and barring is a horizontal mark. And you can see it goes down across the wing. They also have more heavily streaked breasts, and streaking is vertical marking. So you can see it goes up and down the chest. And they also have pale tails with light bars going across. And you can also see that red-tailed hawk juveniles do not have red tails. Adults, of course, have red tails, and they also have a dark band on the trailing end of their wing. And females are also larger than males in red-tailed hawks. You might be wondering, why are female raptors larger than males? So sexual size dimorphism is when males of a species are larger than females. In raptors, we have reverse sexual size dimorphism, which means the females are larger than males. And the main hypothesis about why this occurs is because female raptors have talons, so they can physically defend their nest against predators. So females have an advantage in being larger, so they have that competitive edge against their predators. Smaller birds like songbirds don't have talons, so they can't defend their nests. So there's no reason for females to be larger than males. The second species we're going to be looking at is the red-shouldered hawk. It is also in the genus Buteo, and if you remember, Buteos have broad wings and short tails. They live in forests and suburbs that are mixed with woodlands, and they mostly eat small mammals, reptiles, and amphibians. They don't eat birds as often. One cool thing you can see a lot is crows and red-shouldered hawks mobbing each other for food. And red-shouldered hawks also have a very distinctive call. When I first heard it, I thought it was a seagull, so I wanted to play it for you guys so you can know what it sounds like. When you want to ID a red-shouldered hawk, you want to look for the reddish-orange breast. And they have translucent crescents near the tips of their wings. And you can't see it very well in this picture, but the next slide will have a better example. They also have a very thin white strip on the end of their tail, and they have 3 nicely spaced black bands. When they're perched, you can see their checkerboard back, which is black and white spotting where their wings are, and then they also have red shoulders. And these birds are also pretty large, between the size of a crow and a goose, but they are slightly smaller than red-tailed hawks. If you want to tell adult and juveniles apart, you want to look for juveniles being more brown than red. You want to look for their streaked breast, which, as we talked about with the red-tailed hawk, it means a vertical marking along their breast. And adults have barred breasts, which means a horizontal marking. Juveniles also have thinner tail bands as opposed to the 3 nicely spaced tail bands on the adult red-shouldered. Adult red-shouldered hawks also have a dark band on the trailing end of their wing, as we saw in the adult red-tailed hawks. And again, in this species, the females are larger than males. This is the third hawk that we're going to be looking at, the Cooper's hawk. It is in the genus Accipiter, which are also called true hawks because of their very distinct body shape. They have short wings and long tails, as opposed to the Buteo, which has broad wings and short tails. They live in forest and woodland, and you can also find them in the suburbs. They hunt medium-sized birds like doves and pigeons, and they're actually now more prevalent in towns and the suburbs than in their natural habitat because of the abundance of birds like doves and pigeons. When you want to identify a Cooper's hawk, you want to look for the bluish gray head, the red breast, and the relatively short wings. And on their tail, they have a thick white band on the very end. And the most important part is looking for that really long tail. And these birds are slightly smaller than red-shouldered. They're about the size of a crow. You can see in this picture that juveniles and adults look pretty different. Juveniles have brown heads while adults have that very distinct blue-gray head. Juveniles have yellowish eyes while adults have red eyes. And Cooper's hawks have the juveniles have vertically streaked breasts while adults have the horizontally marked barred breasts. And once again, the females in the species are larger than the males. You might be wondering how you can tell a juvenile red-shouldered hawk and a juvenile Cooper's hawk apart. The main thing is to look for that very long tail in the Cooper's hawk. And Cooper's hawks also generally have very thick black and bluish gray stripes, while red-shouldered hawks have a thinner white band and a thicker black band. And this is a better example of the thick black and the thin white. And this is an adult red-shouldered hawk. For the red shoulder, you can also see the red shoulders and the checkerboard back. So there are actually 51 different accipiter hawks in the world, but there are only 3 in North America. The first was the Cooper's hawk, and then we also have the sharp-shinned hawk, which is very small, only about the size of a robin, and it has a rectangular tail as opposed to the Cooper's hawk's rounded tail. The other accipiter hawk in North America is the northern goshawk. It lives at high elevations in dense forests, so you're not going to see them in Orange County, and they're very large, about the size of a red-tailed hawk. So we have our first quiz. Take a look at this picture and find at least 2 characteristics to identify the species, and try to find at least 1 characteristic to determine the age. And you can either unmute yourself or type your guess into the chat. So one thing you want to take a look at is the wing. Do you notice any distinctive marks along the wing that we talked about? Yes, there is a lot of barring on the wings. Does anyone else notice this right here? Yes, so there is a patagial mark on the wing, as someone pointed out in the chat. The reddish color, I think, is more of the photo. But yeah, so we can move on to the answer. So as we pointed out, there is a patagial mark on the wing. And this, you can also see, it's sort of hard to see, but there is a dark belly band right here. So these 2 marks indicate that this is a red-shouldered hawk. And to tell the age, there was barring on the wings, as someone pointed out, and there's also a very pale tail with light bars. So these all indicate that this is a juvenile red-tailed hawk. We have 1 more quiz for now. This time, try to find at least 3 characteristics to identify the species, and at least 1 to determine the age. Someone pointed out in the chat that there is a short tail. That's correct. Does anyone notice anything about the coloration? Yes, there is a checkerboard back on this bird. Does anyone see anything that might indicate if this is an adult or juvenile? Yes, it is an adult. What specifically do you notice? anything about the coloration of the bird. It has a red breast, and that indicates that it's an adult. So as we pointed out, this species has a reddish-orange breast. It also has red shoulders and a checkerboard back, like someone pointed out. It also has that short black and white tail that, and the short tail that is characteristic of buteos. And it also has a barred breast to indicate that it's an adult. And it also has the red breast, saying it's an adult, as opposed to the more brownish of a juvenile. So this is an adult red-shouldered hawk. Our last bird here is the turkey vulture. It's in the family Cathartidae, which is the same as the California condor. It lives in open areas, also in desert, grassland, or along the side of the road, similar to red-tailed hawks. They eat freshly dead animals, which is called carrion, and they almost never attack living prey. And they have very strong stomach acid, which means they can eat carcasses without getting sick with all the bacteria and viruses and parasites. To identify a turkey vulture, you want to look for the bright, naked red head. And their pale bill, which a lot of the times when they're flying and it's sunny out, you can see the sunlight really gleaming off of the bill. They also have silvery feathers on the underside of the wing. And they will soar in wobbly circles. They sort of tilt back and forth as they're flying. Some people will mistake them for California condors, but you can see in this picture here that condors actually have the opposite wing color, with white along the leading edge of the wing as opposed to the black in the turkey vulture. Condors are actually also much larger. Their wingspan is 9 feet, while the turkey vulture is about 5 to 6 feet. Juvenile turkey vultures have an ash gray head and dark bills, as opposed to the bright red heads and the white bills of the adults. And in turkey vultures, both sexes are actually about the same size. And the reason for this is because female turkey vultures do not have sharp talons, so they can't physically defend their nest. So there's no reason for females to be larger than males to have that competitive edge over their predators. If you want to learn more about identifying birds, we have some good field guides. One's by National Geographic and the other by Sibley. And there's also a good handful of phone apps. There's Merlin Bird ID, which is by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. There's also iNaturalist and iBird Pro. So we have our last quiz. This one might be a little bit harder, but try to find at least 2 characteristics to identify the species and at least 1 to determine the age. And I actually took this photo in my backyard, and I'll give you a hint that the bird was about the size of a crow. Someone pointed out that there's dark bands on the tail. And someone else also pointed out that it has a long tail. Those are good answers. Does anyone know how you could tell this bird apart from a juvenile or an adult? This one might be tricky. Yes, that's true. There's no red. And then we also talked about the eye in one of the species. This one, I mentioned it very quickly, so you might not be able to remember. Yes, it is also darker in color. Usually dull colors indicate a juvenile. But yeah, so someone mentioned the juvenile has a light eye and the adult has a red eye. That is correct. Okay, so someone pointed out the species has a long tail and thick black and blue-gray stripes. So we talked about the Cooper's hawk having the long tail and the black and gray stripes, but there was also the sharp-shinned hawk that I mentioned briefly, which looks very similar. But since sharpshins are much smaller, only about the size of a robin, and since this bird was about the size of a crow, you know that it was a Cooper's hawk. This bird also has a brown head and a bright yellow eye, as opposed to the adults, which have a bright red eye. So this bird is a juvenile Cooper's hawk. Thank you everyone for participating. So now I'm going to be talking about the conservation issues that raptors face. The three I'll be talking about is rodenticide poisoning, lead poisoning, and window strikes. Rodenticide is poison used to kill rodents, and the problem with a lot of poison baits is that rodents will eat the bait, and then they wander away and they start to feel sick, and they become easy prey for predators like raptors, coyotes, and cougars. And when predators eat multiple poison rats, the poison eventually builds up inside them, and this is called bioaccumulation. This can usually cause lack of appetite and dullness, and it also causes internal bleeding, which makes the bird more susceptible to small accidents like getting hit by a car or crashing into a window. Usually the treatment is giving vitamin K supplements to the affected animal. The EPA bans certain types of rodenticides, but the problem still persists. Raptors can also technically recover on their own, but the problem with rodenticide is that it takes a very long time to break down within the body. So usually before they can clear out the poison from one poisoned rat that they ate, they'll eat another poisoned rat. Another issue that is affecting raptors is lead poisoning. When hunters shoot game with lead bullets, the metal is very soft, so it'll fragment into a bunch of pieces. And if the hunter does not clean up the carcass, scavengers like vultures and bald eagles will ingest both the carcass and the lead fragments. Once it's ingested, the lead enters the bloodstream and birds will be weak, dizzy, and have difficulty breathing. If the poisoning is severe, the bird often dies, but if it's less severe, they can be given medication that cleans the bloodstream. Lead is different from rodenticide in that it can't be cleared out naturally. When lead gets into the body, it builds up in the animal's bones, so it can't be removed naturally. The last issue that raptors face are window strikes. This happens in two ways. The first is when a raptor is chasing a bird and the bird sees vegetation reflected in the window. And when the prey bird goes to flying for cover toward the window, it hits the window, and then the raptor hits the window after that. The second reason why window strikes happen is because they will migrate at night, and they often become disoriented by bright city lights and they crash into buildings. Birds may be dazed after a minor window strike, but major strikes can result in broken bones, blindness, or death. Birds can recover on their own from minor strikes. They can be placed in a dark room and recover in as little as 15 minutes. But with major strikes, it may take up 2 months to recover from their broken bones or other injuries. Lastly, I wanted to highlight 3 local organizations that help raptors. The first is the Orange County Bird of Prey Center. They rehabilitate and release wild raptors, and they also do a lot of community education. They have 40 to 70 birds at the rescue at a given time, and they also have 9 education ambassador raptors. And these are raptors that were taken into their center who are injured but cannot be released either because they imprinted on people and refused to hunt for themselves, or because they could not fully recover and cannot function normally in the wild. We also have the Ojai Raptor Center, which is similar to the Orange County Bird of Prey Center. They also rehabilitate and release wildlife, but they do take in any wildlife in distress. So out of 1,000 total patients, 600 to 800 of those will be raptors. They also have education ambassador raptors. And lastly, we have the International Bird Rescue. They rescue and clean oiled birds, and they don't specifically work with raptors, but sometimes they'll get them transferred to their center because they're contaminated with oil. And when that happens, they will wash the bird and keep them for a few days before sending them back to their original rehab center. So you might be wondering now, there's a lot of problems facing that raptors face. How can you help? The first is to avoid rat poison. You can avoid attracting rodents in the first place by keeping outdoor areas clean of food and even things like pet food. You can also help prevent window strikes by installing tinted film or mosquito screens to windows. This cuts down on the reflective properties of the window so they don't see vegetation. Mosquito screens also act as a little cushion for the birds if they accidentally hit your window. You can also turn off excess outdoor lights, especially during migrating seasons. You'll also want to postpone tree trimming. You want to wait until fall to trim trees after raptor chicks have left the nest. And this picture is actually some red-tailed hawk chicks in a tree. You can also sponsor an injured raptor by donating to raptor organizations. And through the Orange County Bird of Prey Center, you can actually sponsor a bird and release it personally back to the wild. If you ever happen to find an injured or sick raptor, you can contact these agencies, depending on where you live, and they will pick up the animal for you and transfer it to the correct rehab center for you. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you learned a lot about raptors today. I'm Tiffany from OC Habitats.
Thank you, Tiffany. That's great. We are going to move right into our next speaker so that we stay on time. And I believe, is it Angela or Gabby that's going next? Gabby. All right, we're gonna go ahead and pull your slideshow up and we'll go from there.
So I'm Gabriela Lopez, or Gabby, from OC Habitats. I'm an intern with the organization, and I am in my graduating semester at Cal State Long Beach. So I am very interested, and I learned enough over the years, and I would like to share some of that with you all. So this is my presentation on poison oak and mugwort, and they are just some of the native plants we have in our Orange County local habitats. So just a rundown of what I'll be talking about. I will be introducing the habitats of these plants and where you are most likely to find them, and dive down deeper into poison oak, its adaptations, its structure, and how you can identify it, and the same thing for mugwort. And then in the end, I will discuss how they have been found in history, how they are used today, and their general relationship within each other. So let's discuss their habitats, where you are most likely to find poison oak and where you are likely to find mugwort. Okay, so for poison oak, you're most likely to find it in oak woodland and chaparral habitats in Orange County. You can find poison oak in a few other habitats, but this is where you will find, where it favors the area most. I want to apologize for some beeping going on in the background. I hope you guys can't hear it too much, but just moving on. Oak woodland and chaparral habitats are habitats that have adapted to a Mediterranean climate, and this essentially means that they grow rapidly during the wetter winter months. So that's from about November, December to about February, March. And then they begin to slow down in the summer months, as many of our plants do, being deciduous drought plants. And another adaptation of oak woodland and chaparral habitats are their adaptation of fire, which is a natural occurrence in these habitats. And they actually help bring vegetation change throughout the area. Now, it's important to note that the increased frequency of these wildfires have actually altered the habitats a bit, and the increased intensity and frequency have actually posed as a threat. So it's important to monitor these and make sure they don't further damage these habitats. Another adaptation of oak woodland and chaparral habitats are that they are commonly found near water sources behind riparian habitats. And speaking of riparian habitats, that is another habitat we will be discussing, because this is typically where you will find California mugwort. And riparian habitats occur nearby and adjacent to rivers, streams, lakes, and other bodies of waters. They are considered the transitional zone between terrestrial systems and water systems. So they will be along the first plants you see along a riverbed or a water bank. So the vegetation across this habitat will solely be shaped by the presence of water, and is actually supportive of some of the highest plant diversity that we have in Orange County. An interesting adaptation of the plants found in riparian habitats are that they are commonly able to help filter out excess nutrients in the water. So they kind of serve as this filter between the water that will be transferred into farther out habitats. So let's discuss our first plants of the presentation. This is Pacific poison oak. We'll be discussing its structure, its growth, how you can identify it, and its importance to our ecology. So Pacific or Western poison oak, also known as Toxicodendron diversilivum, is a plant is a vine or shrub native to California. And these are just some images showing its growth. You have in this, can you see my mouse? Yes. So in this first image, you have the new growth of the plant. You have these small leaves coming out, and they will initially come out of the plant with a very shiny reddish hue. They will grow out of that reddish hue into a very vibrant green color, and they will stay with this shiny color until they are much older. They fade the green and they get into this paler, duller, reddish orange color. And this is around the time of now, actually, this is around the time you will see poison oak have this look, and that just means that they are ready to drop soon to restart their growth in the winter. So as I said, this is just some rundown of the plant structure and growth of Pacific poison oak. They are native to the Pacific Northwest and all throughout California. They grow quickly in the February to March months, in the wetter winter months that we have, and they begin to bloom from around April to June. And then in the late summer, fall is when their leaves will begin to dull out and fall in the autumn to restart the cycle again. Their flowers will be these small white flowers that grow in these clusters, and they will have pale green berries on them. Poison oak can often be mistaken for poison ivy, but they're actually in the same genus of Toxicodendron. Some further ways to identify the structure and growth of a poison oak is that they will be seen as a shrub or vine shape. So here's a photo of the poison oak climbing up the tree in a vine, or can be more close to the ground in a shrub. And again, just a way to identify is the shiny hue on the leaves, the bright green, dark color that they have in the summer. And then in the fall, they will become a yellow, paler red color. And an important way to identify poison oak is through its leaflets. So each leaflet that shoots out of the branch will shoot out in leaves of 3. And they have this lobed shape on the edge. And this is where you hear the phrase, leaves of 3, leave it be. So that's something you can remember to identify poison oak the next time you're out on a hike. So some specific adaptations of poison oak is the urushiol oil. Now that is what causes the well-known itchiness and rash of poison oak. That's why we consider it poison oak, because it will cause an itchy rash, also known as contact dermatitis, and it is present on the leaves year-round. So even if you brush against it on just on a hike or a walk, it is very important to stay far away from it, because a light brush can cause the itchiness. Light exposure will cause itchiness and can increase as you are further exposed to it. It's also important to note that wildfires cause very poisonous smoke from poison oak, because the burning of poison oak releases toxic smoke. So it's very dangerous to be around burning poison oak, as the smoke becomes very toxic. The oil is originally believed to be a defense mechanism of the plant against excessive grazing from the mammals around, and also serving as a antimicrobial agent and protects the plant from bacterial infections or any type of diseases that may damage the plant. Okay, so we have our first pop quiz of this presentation. If you guys can remember what we've talked about, can you name 3 ways to identify poison oak? And I will give everybody a minute just to look at this photo, to look at the leaves, the color, the shape, and see if you can name 3 ways. Leaves of 3, let it be. Yep, the shiny leaves. Great, I'm glad people remembered the leaves of 3. The oily leaves. The oil sheen on the leaves is what causes the shininess. Can anybody identify anything else? Well, the leaves are the easiest way to identify it, so that's really good. Another way you can identify it is by how it's growing. So if it's growing like a large shrub or a climbing vine, the bright green and the lobed leaves are one way to identify it by its leaves. And again, as you all said, the easiest way to remember it is the leaflets of 3. As you all remember, leave it be. So great job, everyone. Thank you so much. But let's discuss the importance to our surrounding ecology. I know poison oak seems to be very scary because we can get all itchy from it. It can cause blisters or rashes. But poison oak is surprisingly very helpful to our ecology, specifically to our birds and small mammals in chaparral and oak woodlands. So as you can see from this photo here, the least bell vero was considered is actually an endangered bird, and poison oak has been seen as a nesting site for the bird. And furthermore, from just the bird, poison oak actually provides food and shelter to other surrounding wildlife and soil stability for the local plant life. To give a little more detail into that, the urushiol oil does not affect the wildlife the way it does humans. This is why small mammals and birds, such as the black-tailed deer and the California towhee, can enjoy the benefits of poison oak. The leaves are available for grazing, the berries and the small insects are available for the birds, and these cowering bushes are often used as shelter by smaller mammals. In this another point is the plant. The plant itself was used medicinally by Native Americans, often to treat sores and warts. And the way they did this was by boiling the roots, making sure not to get any of the vapor get into their eyes or in their face, because again, the smoke and the vapor can be toxic just as much as the plant itself. And this liquid was then drunk cold, and this was a way to heal internal illnesses such as a stomach ache, and also that plasters of powdered poison oak was used on wounds and lacerations, and it was recorded to be very effective in using poison oak to heal these wounds. And another important fact about poison oak is that it sprouts in disturbed areas. This is also known as a pioneer species. So because oak woodlands and chaparral will face a lot of burns, poison oak is one of the first plants to sprout back up, and it does so in a way that stabilizes the newly disturbed soil. And because of this, it paves the way for other plants to establish themselves and grow. And then you have the cycle growing all over again. This is a process known as succession. So poison oak goes through a process of succession for this habitat, helping the ecology to bounce back from a fire. So After discussing that, it is important then to see how the relationship works with California mugwort. So we learned a lot about poison oak and how it helps the ecology and how it may not help us as much, whereas California mugwort becomes kind of the opposite in a very funny way. Again, this is just some of the way you can identify it. You have a lot of bushiness here. It grows tall in various stems and with leaves shooting out, thin leaves shooting out. And then this is what it looks like before it begins to bloom. You have the clusters of flowers all along growing all along the stem, and it blooms into small clusters of yellow flowers. The scientific name is Artemisia douglasania, or Douglas mugwort is another way you can see it be called. Some of the plant structure and growth you'll find for mugwort is that it is a perennial forb, and forb is just another word for tall grasses, flowering tall grasses. And so it is native to the Western United States and found in riparian habitats. This plant will grow upwards in very thick stems, and it will bloom between the months of May and October. And it is related to the California sagebush, also known as Artemisia californica. And this plant you will also find in riparian habitats and oak woodland habitats. In the blooming season, as we saw, it produces these clusters of small yellow flowers. And a way to identify the plant itself is that it has this woolly texture on the underside of the leaves, and it is pale green on the underside. On the top, it will also have a woolly texture, but it will be a bit of a darker color than this underside. The edges can sometimes be smooth, or they can have this serrated shape along the edge. Just depending on where you find them, it is just a variation, but they will either have these spikes or be completely smooth. But these spikes aren't sharp. Some important California mugwort adaptations is the extensive rhizome system that it has. Now, a rhizome is simply just a sideways shoot of a stem that allows for the mugwort to grow upwards in a different area. So all of this mugwort can be connected to each other as one ginormous plant underneath. And they will have the roots of the individual plant shooting out, but a stem shoot out the side that helps a new mugwort stem grow upwards. If you've ever owned a snake plant and looked underneath that's roots, oftentimes snake plants grow the exact same way. So rhizomes are useful for California mugworts because they can help store extra protein for the plants, and this will help them survive if they are ever faced with an unfavorable season, such as excessive drought. Something to note about these rhizomes and why they are important for riparian habitats is that the stem will stabilize the soil, and it will make it so that erosion from the water does not take away all of this soil. And it allows for the other plants in the riparian habitats to thrive along the stream beds and road cuts and other fragile areas. So some of the ways that mugwort is important to its surrounding ecology is from nesting material available for birds, bees, and other insects and small animals. As you can see, they're smaller insects that like to place themselves on the leaves, and this is a way it also provides food for birds and butterflies. It provides seed forage, perching spots, and some vegetative cover, which are just some further wildlife benefits to mugwort. Now, mugwort can actually be toxic in ingestion for some wild animals, but mugwort in ingestion has not been toxic for humans, and it has actually, in the contrary, been historically used to relieve headaches, stomach aches, muscle pain, and has even been used to treat menstrual issues. So even though mugwort has been seen toxic in large digestion from plants, from animals, mugwort itself can be used and has been historically used and mild remedies to help with headaches and stomach aches and other illnesses. And something important to note is that it can be used to treat the rashes brought on by poison oak. So something interesting is that mugwort, this is mugwort here, it will grow quite close or even right next to poison oak and vice versa. So if you're ever on a hike, if you're ever walking through these habitats and you come across one or the other, you are most likely to find its partner somewhere nearby. Okay, and now we've reached our second and final quiz, and this quiz asks if you can find 2 ways that mugwort can be identified. You guys can shout it out or type it out in the chat. Just what are some ways that we've gone over how you may identify mugwort? It's fuzzy leaves. It's got a very woolly texture. If you ever decide to, it's quite soft. Another way you can identify it is if it's next to poison oak. Bushy, has thin leaves that shoot out. Great. Thank you so much, you guys. So yeah, just some of the ways you can identify is the woolly texture on the leaves. It's quite soft and it's green color on the top side and a paler grayish green color on the underside. It will stick out. It will grow out upright in some thick stem growth, very tall and bushy, as someone pointed out. And the shape of the leaf will also have a either tooth serrated edge or very smooth. So the photo before had a serrated edge that we saw, while this one here has a smoother edge. But these are both mugwort. Okay, and furthermore, we just want to kind of talk about the importance of mugwort and poison oak. They're found growing next to each other, and they may serve as opposites kind of to each other, but they are both very useful for the ecology and human history. So even though poison oak seems to affect us, mugwort is the antidote serves as the antidote to that. One way that we find that we can know this is through the records left behind by the Native Americans, specifically the Chumash tribe in the Santa Barbara Hills. And the way they would do this would be one of the simplest ways would be to grab some leaves of mugwort and crush it in between their hands, and they'd rub it onto the rash of the affected area that poison oak brushed up against. And as we said before, they would sometimes boil the root or boil the leaves and make a tea. Another way that was recorded was that they would boil a large pot, let that cool, and then soak in it to relieve any skin irritation or any headaches. Okay, now that we have discussed a lot about these 2 plants, what's something you can take away from this presentation? An important thing to take away is to be vigilant on your next hike. It's important to be able to identify these plants for your safety so that you can keep away from poison oak, but also if you happen to be affected, you have a quick remedy nearby if you can identify mugwort just as easy. If you are exposed to poison oak, do not shower. It is said that the hot steam will heighten the urushiol oil, and it will further irritate your skin. And it is important to keep in mind that urushiol oil spreads easily, and it could potentially show up on your pets, even if you haven't checked. And even though it might not affect them, it can spread into your couches, your carpet, or on yourself if you haven't washed your pet before they enter the home. And it is important to note that mugwort still poses their own risk. In large doses, mugwort can still be toxic, so it is important to do your own research if you decide to use it in a home remedy, and talk to your doctor before using this plant, just to make sure there is nothing within the plant that can hurt you if you decide to use it. From here, you can learn, there are various ways you can learn more and get involved. One way you can get involved is joining OC Habitats for a local hike. Yesterday, we actually went to the San Mateo campgrounds in San Clemente, and we led a hike with some students, and we taught them about the habitats that they're surrounded by, and we let them know. We were able to capture glimpses of poison oak and mugwort, so we were able to let them know a lot of information that you just learned from this presentation. So if you ever decided to join us on one of our local hikes, you can learn a lot about the surrounding habitats in Orange County. the native and non-native species in these habitats, including which ones may be endangered and which ones may be invasive. And you can learn more interesting facts about our wildlife, the way we are impacting these species and habitats, and what you can do to help and minimize these impacts. Another way you can learn how to identify is through these apps, iNaturalist and Seek. iNaturalist lets you take a picture of it and go through various suggestions of what it may be. And Seek is a more user-friendly, beginner-friendly version of that tells you what it believes the plant might be. And these are just some ways you can learn how to identify it, but also learn various species and species within these habitats and what these habitats offer. Another way is by joining these CNCs that OC Habitats provides. So with all being said, does anybody have any further questions or would like to point out any experiences they've had with poison oak and mugwort, or further continue the discussion? If not, I want to thank you guys for listening and thank you guys for joining. And if you have any further questions, you can send them to our email or visit our website or follow us on our social media pages. So thank you again. I'm Gabby Lopez with OC Habitats.
Thank you, Gabby. We're going to move on to Angela. And at the end, you guys are being a little quiet. I like that you're participating in the chat. That's fabulous. We are trying to make this timely, so we will open it up to open discussion at the end. So if you have questions that you'd like to discuss, we can do that for all three presentations at the very end. So Angela, it is all yours. While Angela's figuring that out, maybe Kim or Gina could pull it up for her just in case. I wanted to, while we're waiting and while we're getting that pulled up, I wanted to ask Gabby, can you, once the leaves drop off of poison oak, are they still toxic or do they dry up enough where you can touch them?
You know, that's a good question, and I should probably look into that. I would assume the plant would eventually dry out, but if you are ever on a hike and you don't know, such as I don't right now, I think the best option would be to just stay vigilant and stay away from it. Because I don't know how active it is, how active the toxic oil is after the leaves drop. But that's something you should look into.
Okay, great. No,
yeah.
Thank you. The other question I have is you mentioned poison ivy. Is poison ivy found here on the West Coast?
Oh, no. So poison ivy is only found on the East Coast, Central and East Coast of the US. So you're not likely to find poison oak on the West Coast. But you're also not likely to find poison oak on the East Coast. It's kind of its regional areas. Another thing to point out is poison sumac is also in the same genus as poison oak and poison ivy. And poison sumac can be found in the central woodland habitats of the US.
Awesome, thank you. And so I have all these poison oak questions. All right, and I have another question for you, Gabby. So we talked about what not to do with poison oak, right? Don't shower, but what should they do? Do you have any recommendations as to what they should do?
If you've been exposed or in general to the plant?
When you've been exposed, say you've touched it. So we know we don't want to shower, we don't want to get a hot shower, but what do we want to do? Because you don't want to just leave it on your skin, right?
Right. So if you are lucky enough to encounter some mugwort nearby, you can crush it up with a little bit of water to make it into a thick plant paste, and you would press that onto the affected area. If you aren't able to, the next best thing is to rinse it with some water and apply some anti-itch cream if it's available. If not, then once you get back from your hike, just apply anti-itch remedy as soon as possible.
Awesome, thank you. Well, it looks like we have our slideshow up.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Angela Velasquez, and I am currently an intern at OC Habitats. Alongside that, I am a fourth-year college student attending California State University, Long Beach, and working towards a degree in marine biology. I am also excited to say that I will be graduating in the spring of 2023. So today I will be giving a presentation on ocean gyres. Next slide, please. Throughout this presentation, there will be 3 main ideas or topics that will be discussed. Firstly, we will begin with ocean gyres, then the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and lastly, we will touch a little bit on the Marine Protected Area Watch Program. Next slide, please. So to begin with, what are ocean gyres? Well, ocean gyres are large systems of circular ocean currents formed by global wind patterns and forces created by the Earth's rotation. So gyres essentially appear and function as a massive whirlpool or vortex in the middle of the oceans. And the movement of the world's major ocean gyres helps drive the oceanic conveyor belt. Next slide, please. The oceanic conveyor belt helps circulate ocean water around the entire planet. In result, this creates a constant circular motion, and this is absolutely essential for regulating temperature, salinity, and nutrient flow throughout the entire ocean. Next slide, please. So there are actually 5 major gyres circulating the ocean. First, we have the North Pacific Gyre. Then we have the South Pacific Gyre, the North Atlantic, the South Atlantic, and lastly, the Indian Ocean Gyre, all in which fit into 3 subcategories: polar, subtropical, and tropical. For example, off the coast of California, right above the equator, we have the subtropical North Pacific Gyre. Next slide, please. So I am definitely a visual learner, so I wanted to include this image to better orient ourselves as to where these gyres are actually located. So let's start at the top left. If we can locate the coast of California and Mexico, to the left of that is where we will find the North Pacific Gyre. Below that and below the equator of the western side of South America, that is where the South Pacific Gyre is located. Now moving towards the center of the page, off the coast of the eastern United States, across the pond to Europe, that is where the North Atlantic Gyre resides. Below the equator, in between South America and the bottom half of Africa, is where the South Atlantic Gyre resides. Last but not least, if we orient ourselves to the right side of this image, the Indian Ocean Gyre is located below the equator, in between Africa, India, and Australia. Next slide, please. So there are actually 3 forces that cause the formation and the circulation of a gyre. So the first one we will be talking about is global wind patterns. This is where wind drags on the ocean surface, causing water to move in the direction the wind is blowing. The second one to keep in mind is Earth's rotation. Earth's rotation deflects or changes the direction of the wind-driven currents. This deflection is part of the Coriolis effect, which is something we will touch on a later slide. The last force that causes the formation of a gyre are Earth's continents and other land masses, such as islands, which create a sort of boundary. This type of boundary allows for the creation and the actual shape of the ocean gyre to take place. Next slide, please. So the Coriolis effect is actually a mechanism caused by the Earth's rotation on its axis. This in turn shifts surface currents by a measure of 45 degrees. But this is different. In the northern hemisphere, ocean currents are deflected to the right in a clockwise motion, whereas in the southern hemisphere, ocean currents are pushed to the left in a counterclockwise motion. And I actually have a great small scale example that can be observed right in the comfort of your own homes. Since we live in the northern hemisphere, if you flush your toilet, you'll notice that the water swirls in a clockwise motion. But if we were to live in a country below the equator, such as Peru, for example, then we would see that same water flowing in a counterclockwise direction. Next slide. So another thing to keep in mind when discussing ocean gyres, it's important to highlight two very different types of currents circulating the ocean. First, we have surface currents. These currents are driven by global wind that is fueled with energy from the sun. And these surface currents transfer heat from the tropics to the polar regions. And they're actually responsible for influencing local and global climate in our areas. Whereas deep ocean currents are created by a process called thermohaline circulation. And thermohaline circulation is kind of a big word and it's a bit intimidating. So let's take a moment to break down what that actually means. So thermo really just refers to temperature, and the word haline refers to salinity. So this is talking about temperature and salinity circulation. With that being said, deep ocean currents are caused by differences in water density. So we can imagine that dense, cold, salty water sinks to the bottom of the ocean because it's heavier, whereas warm and less dense salty water will float right on top. So that's kind of what it'll look like. Moving on. And we actually have our first quiz. We actually have our first quiz. So the question is, what gyre is located off the coast of California? And feel free to type it in the chat or unmute yourselves. And yeah, so I'll give you guys a few seconds to figure out what gyre is located in that area. Perfect. We see I am starting to see some answers flow in, and you guys are 100% correct. It is the North Pacific gyre that is off the coast of California and Mexico. And remember, it's the North Pacific because it sits on top of the equator. If I were to ask you guys, oh, what's the gyre below the equator? Then you guys would know, oh yeah, that's the South Pacific gyre. So great job, everybody. Moving straight along is another mechanism. Oh, sorry, next slide, please. So perfect. So to stay on the same rhythm and page of the surface currents we were just talking about, beneath surface currents of a gyre, the Coriolis effect results in something called the Ekman spiral. Here, surface currents are deflected by about 45 degrees, and each deeper layer in the water column is deflected slightly less. This results in a spiral pattern descending about 300 feet, which is about 100 meters. And I understand you guys might be asking, well, why does it only descend down to 100 meters? Well, we have to keep in mind that the Ekman spiral is dealing with surface currents. And surface currents are moving due to the shear force of the wind. So as you go deeper and deeper into the ocean, the strength of the force is going to be felt less and less. Another answer could be that since the Ekman spiral is dealing with surface currents, anything below 100 meters and deeper is where we start seeing deep ocean currents and that thermohaline circulation coming into play. Next slide, please. So this image should look familiar to most of us, but this time we are looking at it with a fresh pair of eyes. We can now acknowledge and appreciate the intricate and interconnecting mechanisms taking place within the ocean that's allowing for the formation and circulation of oceanic gyres. Not only that, but it allows us to highlight specific mechanisms such as the Coriolis effect and how that drives the Ekman spiral, and how the Ekman spiral only deals with surface currents, contrasting those deep ocean currents that take into consideration temperature, salinity, and density, all in which work together to accomplish crucial standards and goals for marine species who inhabit the ocean, but also for the human population that relies heavily on the ocean for a number of reasons, such as climate and even the air we breathe. So with that being said, oceanic gyres is a good transitioning point that will lead us to our next topic, which is garbage patches. Next slide, please. The area in the center of a gyre tends to be very calm and stable. This is because the circular motion of the gyre is on the outside. The currents bordering the gyre is what is moving. So the circular motion of the gyre actually draws in debris into the center where it becomes trapped. And eventually, due to the lack of movement, the debris starts to accumulate and break down into this kind of like yucky plastic soup. And it's important to note that these garbage patches are created over long periods of time. It's not a day or night thing. It takes a long time for these garbage patches to form. And despite that fact, there are major and worrisome garbage patches all throughout the Indian Ocean, the North Atlantic Ocean, and the North Pacific Ocean. Next slide, please. Since most of us reside in the state of California, we will be focusing on the garbage patch located off of our coast. The North Pacific Gyre holds the famous Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and it gets its name for being the largest collection of marine debris in the ocean. It is about 1.6 kilometers. And just to put that into scale, that is twice the size of Texas. This is a massive amount of area. And within this garbage patch, we can find a variety of marine debris, such as fishing gear like ropes and crates and nets, single-use plastic like food containers, plastic bottles, and even at times abandoned vessels. And the word vessel just refers to boats or rafts. And this garbage patch was actually discovered by a racing boat captain by the name of Charles Moore. He was actually sailing from Hawaii to California after competing in a yachting race. So he actually was the first person to discover this patch in the year 1997. Next slide, please. The reason why the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is so massive is because it's actually composed of the Western Garbage Patch located near Japan and the Eastern Garbage Patch located between the US and the states of California and Hawaii. Let's just keep in mind this image has a Western Hemisphere point of view, which is why California is furthest east and Japan is furthest west. So I just wanted to make that clear so you guys aren't confused as to why California is on the east. It has an Eastern Hemisphere point of view. Perfect. Next slide, please. So the pictures I have shown in the previous slides only featured debris floating on the surface of the ocean. In reality, those pictures don't really capture the entire story. The sea floor beneath the garbage patches can also be underwater trash heaps. Oceanographers and ecologists, biologists recently discovered that about 70% of marine debris actually sinks to the bottom of the ocean. And it's important to note that these areas of highly dense garbage patches invades waters of marine organisms who inhabit the area. So the garbage isn't pushing any animals out, instead is forcing these animals and the trash to interact with one another. Yet most of the time, this interaction between trash and the animals is highly detrimental to the largest and smallest of animals. Next slide, please. For example, let's start with like the smallest of animals. As microplastics and other trash collect on and near the surface of the ocean, they block sunlight reaching phytoplankton and algae below. Algae and plankton are the most common autotrophs or primary producers in the marine food web. And autotrophs just means that these are organisms that can produce their own nutrients from carbon and sunlight. And if algae and plankton communities are threatened, the entire food web may change. Animals that feed on the algae and plankton, such as fish and turtles, will have less food. If populations of those animals decrease, there will be less food for apex predators, such as tunas and sharks and whales. This will eventually destabilize the entire food web and can possibly lead to a total collapse. For the sake of human consumption, seafood would become less available and more expensive for people. On the left, I want to highlight how marine reptiles and mammals commonly get themselves trapped within fishing nets, which is dangerous for these sort of animals because they need to breathe air in order to survive. If they can't resurface by making their way up the water column to respire, these animals will eventually die of suffocation and strangulation. Moving on. Those were large scale plastic problems. Now I want to move on to smaller pieces of plastic called microplastics. Microplastics are characterized and defined to be less than 5 millimeters in length. And most of this miniature plastic comes from bottle caps, plastic toys, styrofoam cups. And these plastics are highly dangerous for marine species such as shrimp, small fish, birds, because these animals confuse microplastics for food, and the consumption of these plastics often kills them. So before we move on to the next slide, I want you guys to hypothesize and think to yourselves, well, why are these species confusing these microplastics as food? So I'm going to launch a poll, and you guys, it's completely anonymous. So yeah, go ahead and hypothesize and think, what is the #1 reason as to why these species are confusing plastics for food? I'll leave this up for a few seconds. I see answers rolling in. I'm going to wait about, I'm going to say 10 more seconds. Perfect. So I'm going to end the poll. And I'm going to share the results. So most of us said that appearance is the reason as to why these species are consuming plastics. And that is definitely a great answer. And I probably would have said that as well. But surprisingly, the correct answer is odor. And sorry, the correct answer, oh, sorry, Gina, can you switch the side? Next slide, please. And the correct answer is actually odor. The fish confuse plastic for edible substances because microplastics in the ocean pick up a covering of biological material such as algae or small invertebrates that mimics the smell of food. So that odor is actually what entices these animals to take a bite out of this plastic, right? But the second most common would be appearance. For example, some microplastics demonstrate a shiny appearance that can mimic fish scales. Lastly, we also have shape, which is also a good answer. Some fish mistake microplastics for eggs, planktonic larvae, and algae based on the shape alone. And this is pretty dangerous because bioaccumulation starts to occur. And this is when an organism absorbs a substance at a rate faster than at which it can be lost or eliminated. And as much as can be eliminated, and that is because plastics are not biodegradable. They will not biodegrade. They will stay intact. And this causes the fish not being able to digest the plastic they've eaten. So it starts to build up inside their GI tracts and cause physical harm to the fish, which ends up having the fish dying of starvation or ruptured organs, unfortunately. Next slide, please. And at the end of the day, well, why should we care, right? Well, we should care. Well, why should we care that fish consume microplastics? Well, any human who consumes seafood should care due to the process of biomagnification. Biomagnification is the accumulation of a particular substance in the body of an organism at different trophic levels of the food chain. So the higher you move up the food chain, it's going to result in a higher concentration in the apex predators. So if, for example, if we look at the right side of this slide, microplastic mimics plankton or algae, right? And then the anchovy eats the microplastic, then a bigger fish, the tuna, eats the anchovy, and then humans, we eat the tuna. So when, in the end of the day, when all of that is done, humans have the greatest amount of buildup of microplastics within themselves. And this is very dangerous because of the toxic minerals that are found within plastics. And based on how much you eat seafood, the probability of you digesting plastic increases dramatically. Next slide, please. Based on what we have just discussed and a multitude of other things, oceanographers and ecologists are concerned about garbage patches and the state of some areas of the ocean. So the big question is, what can we do to help? Luckily, in our community, we can volunteer at our local Marine Protected Areas Watch program, which is MPA for short. Next slide, please. The MPA Watch program is basically a community science program that trains volunteers to observe and collect data on human uses of coastal and marine resources. For example, human uses are subdivided into two groups: consumptive and non-consumptive activities. I'm going to give an example of each. Consumptive activities includes things like canned collection of biota, spearfishing, and kelp harvesting. So this is where humans are physically taking things from the ocean. They are consuming things from the ocean. whereas non-consumptive activities includes things like kayaking, tide pooling, or just regular beach recreation. And these volunteers are fully trained in order to visit MPA areas and record observed activities in hopes of answering imperative questions such as what human uses are in and around MPAs, what resources are needed to support MPAs, and are the regulations in place being followed? Next slide, please. So before moving on, it's important to define what are marine protected areas. Well, marine protected areas are areas chosen and productively supervised in order to maintain and protect marine ecosystems, processes, habitats, and species, all in which can aid in the replenishment and restoration of natural resources. Some benefits of having marine protected areas include increase of biomass of animals and plants, increase overall body size of species, and an increase in overall species diversity, which are all huge pluses in the environmental world. And if we look at the picture, some of you guys might be like, hey, that looks pretty familiar. These are actually located all around Laguna Beach. So if you ever go to Thousand Steps or Table Rock, you'll actually see these signs posted before going into a beach, before walking down to the beach. So it kind of tells you that these are marine protected areas, which is pretty nice to know. Moving on to the next slide, there is actually many MPAs throughout Orange County. We have some in Newport, we have some in Crystal Cove, we have some in Dana Point, and we have some in Laguna. And the reason you guys see two little asterisks alongside Laguna is because these are high priority sites. And high priority sites, biologists want volunteers to go out and monitor these high areas of interest. So Laguna, Table Rock, Shaw's Cove, Crescent Beach, these are areas that we need more people to go out and monitor throughout and to see what is going on there. So moving on to the next and final slide. If you guys are interested and excited to help towards the prosperity of our oceans, definitely check out the OC Habitat's website, or you can email me directly and I can guide you through our MPA training so you can go out and monitor as soon as possible. You can also go directly to OC Coastkeeper's website and sign up to be a volunteer through there. So if you guys, one last slide, Gina, please. If you guys have any questions for me or for any of my other colleagues, please let us know. I am opening up the floor for discussion. And I just want to thank you guys so much for being a great crowd and for listening so kindly. So I thank you all so much. I am Angela Velasquez with OC Habitats.
Nice job. Gina, if you want to take the slide off, we'll go into a forum. We are right at time, so we will take a few questions. Maybe we'll take about 5 minutes to take some questions if anyone has them. I did have a couple things. I know that in Tiffany's presentation, we couldn't hear the bird calls very well, so I don't know if you'd be willing to try again, Tiffany, so we can hear them better.
Yeah, I can try playing them again. Okay, so this is the red-tailed hawk. This is the one that you hear a lot in westerns. Did you hear that better?
A little bit better. Anybody else? Can everybody else hear it? All right, I'm assuming silence is yes, so. You want to do the other one?
Yeah, this is the red-shouldered hawk.
That's the one that's challenging to hear.
Okay. Because it's the same volume, so I'm not sure why it's quieter.
Let me see.
Tiffany, do you have headphones in?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have them with like a little mic? Because you can try putting it like right against the
There's
mic.
a little mic right here.
Oh, I see.
I
Okay.
have, let me see if I can play it on my phone. My phone's acting up right now. All right, well, I'm sorry, but you can look those up online. If you go to Cornell Lab of Ornithology, you can look up all different birds and they will give you the bird sounds, their calls, different types of calls when they're mating, calls when they're calling to their chicks, calling when they're warning, mating, you know, like I said, the mating calls where they're more of a song versus a more of a warning. So there definitely is a place for you to do that. Maybe Kim, Gina, could you put a link to the bird of ornithology in there? I wanted to, I know Gabby talked about iNaturalist and Seek. Both of those are on our free apps that you can use. I will say that I really like iNaturalist because there's a lot of experts in there that have, you know, you can put what you think it is, you can take a picture of it, it'll give you a general idea of what they think it is, and you can kind of say, I think it's this. And then other people who have a lot more experience and may even be botanists or ornithologists will come back and either confirm or tell you why it's wrong. But it's great. It's a really great learning tool. It is very specific to wildlife, though. They don't want you to take pictures of your backyard plants that you bought at Armstrong. So just keep that in mind when you're using it. You know, that you're out in the wild when you're hiking and things like that and looking at wildlife. And last of all, and Angela, I know that you mentioned the size of the North Pacific gyre, and I think I don't know if I heard you correctly, but it was 1.6 million square kilometers. Is that correct? I'm not sure if I heard the million, so I just want to make sure we were clear that it was 1.6 million kilometers, not 1.6 kilometers, square
No,
kilometers.
yeah, so it is about 1.6 square kilometers.
Isn't it 1.6 million square kilometers? If it was 1.6 kilometers, that wouldn't be very big. Like
That
I can
could
run a
be-
5K and that's a 5 kilometers.
Yeah,
So
no, definitely. That could be a typo on my end.
that's okay. I just wanted to clarify because I looked it up and it does say 1.6 million square kilometers. So I just wanted to make sure we were clear to our audience that it is, you know, you were talking about the size of two Texases, right? So that's definitely more like 1.6 million kilometers. So just wanted to make sure everybody knew that they walked away with accurate information.
Thank you for catching that.
Yeah, and then the last thing is, I know you mentioned about plastic being found in humans and the biomagnification. Recently, there's been some studies that they're actually starting to see plastics in fetuses. So that's telling you how it's getting into our human system, even into fetuses who are not eating, you know, we're obviously not spoon feeding a fetus. So it's going through the bloodstream and through the system between the mother and the baby. So that's very important. And it really is infiltrating all systems. So I think it's super important, and I appreciate that you brought that up in your presentation. With that, I'm going to be quiet, and I want to see if anyone else has any questions. We have quite a group here. We really appreciate all of you coming, and we're happy to expand on anything that you wanted maybe a little bit more information on from our speakers. You guys can all unmute yourself, or you can throw it in the chat, however you want. Like I said, we're only going to take a couple more minutes. And then if you are ready to go have your dinner, we understand that too. So we'll wait a couple minutes and then we'll go from there. All right, I'm going to take the silence as that everyone has gotten a lot of information and is ready to go. We did put the links in the chat that if you were looking for the field guides, that was at the very top with the books that Tiffany spoke about. And then we put the other one for Birds Cornell Lab at the bottom. We thank you so much for coming, and this will be posted on our website after we edit it a little bit. And so if you missed it or you felt that it was informational and you want to come back to it, it will be on our website in a few weeks. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a lovely evening.